In a tense courtroom, an elderly, handcuffed man, Elias Carter, a former Marine Staff Sergeant, quietly stated his name. Unbeknownst to all, this simple declaration would unravel a powerful story of sacrifice, forgotten honor, and an unexpected connection, challenging the very notion of justice and reminding us that honor transcends circumstance. Join us as we explore this remarkable tale of recognition and redemption. Elias Carter, 69 years of age, sat hunched on the cold, hard bench of the courtroom. The oversized, faded military coat he wore seemed to swallow his frail frame, a stark contrast to the crisp dress blues adorned with medals that once spoke of his valor. The sterile fluorescent lights of the courtroom did little to soften the harsh realities etched onto his face, each crease a silent testament to decades of loss, both seen and unseen. This was a man who had once stood tall, a protector of his nation, now awaiting judgment in clothes salvaged from a shelter, his dignity seemingly as worn as the fabric he wore. The bailiff's voice broke the tense silence. Case 47B, City of Newbridge vs. Elias Carter. The charges echoed in the room, disturbing the peace, trespassing, resisting arrest. Elias rose slowly, his joints protesting with each movement, a physical manifestation of years of untreated injuries sustained in the sweltering heat of Vietnam and the dusty battlefields of Iraq. The wounds of war were not just visible scars, they were deep-seated aches that time and neglect had only amplified, carried with stoic silence across the decades. A young, polished prosecutor, his voice smooth and rehearsed, addressed the court. "Mr. Carter," he stated, "has been warned repeatedly about loitering behind Jefferson Street Cafe. The owner has filed 3 complaints this month alone." The prosecutor painted a picture of a nuisance, a man disrupting the peace. Yet, his words omitted a crucial part of the story. Elias wasn't begging or demanding handouts. He simply sought the meager warmth emanating from the cafe's alley vent, a desperate attempt to ward off the biting cold of winter nights. Then came the officer's testimony, recounting the late-night encounter behind the cafe. "I found him there at 11:45 p.m. He refused to vacate when ordered." But the truth, as it often does, held a layer of human vulnerability that the official report failed to capture. Elias hadn't outright refused. He had quietly pleaded for 5 more minutes to finish half a sandwich, a small act of kindness from the cafe cook, Jimmy, a gesture that represented a rare moment of human connection in his isolated existence. His plea, however, had fallen on deaf ears then, just as it seemed to now. "Your Honor," the prosecutor continued, his voice unwavering, "this is his 3rd citation this year. We recommend 30 days of community service and a no trespass order for downtown." This seemingly routine recommendation carried a devastating weight for Elias. A no trespass order for downtown Newbridge would effectively sever his lifeline. It would bar him from the 4th Street shelter, the only refuge he had against the unforgiving cold. It would deny him the warmth and sustenance of church-provided meals, leaving him utterly alone during the harshest months of the year. Judge Olivia Parker, a woman who had dedicated her life to upholding the law, finally addressed the accused. "Mr. Carter," her voice was measured, her gaze direct, "do you have legal representation today?" Elias shook his head, a silent acknowledgement of his isolation. His public defender, overburdened and stretched thin, was occupied in another courtroom. "Would you like to speak on your own behalf?" Judge Parker inquired, her eyes peering over the rim of her glasses, a hint of something unreadable in their depths. Elias cleared his throat, the sound rough and strained. "No excuses, ma'am. Just needed to stay warm." "Why that location?" the judge pressed, her expression still inscrutable, yet her tone edged with a subtle curiosity, something beyond the standard judicial inquiry. Elias hesitated. A flicker of memory in his eyes. "Jimmy the cook leaves food sometimes. Known him since he was a boy. His father served with me. Desert Storm." Then, deviating from standard courtroom procedure, Judge Parker asked a question that seemed to hold a personal weight, "And your service?" Elias straightened slightly, a spark of long-dormant pride igniting within him. "United States Marine Corps," he stated, his voice gaining a touch of its former resonance. 1975 to 95, Staff Sergeant, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, Iraq. The words hung in the air, carrying the weight of decades of buried experiences, a glimpse into a past that seemed a world away from the man before her. As Judge Parker quickly made a note on his file, her eyes scanned further, something within Elias Carter's military history causing her hand to still. A name, a unit, a time, fragments of a forgotten past began to coalesce in her mind. Before she could speak, the courtroom doors swung open, and a sharply dressed man entered, his presence commanding attention. The newcomer strode purposefully to the defense table, placing a leather briefcase down with a confident click. "Your Honor, Alexander Ross," he announced, his voice clear and authoritative. "I've just been retained to represent Mr. Carter. I apologize for the abruptness." Elias turned, a look of utter confusion on his weathered face. He hadn't called a lawyer. He couldn't afford one, certainly not a man who exuded such effortless affluence, with his tailored suit and gleaming cufflinks. "This is highly unusual," Judge Parker observed, her gaze sharp and assessing. The court was not informed of new representation. "It was a last-minute development," Ross replied, his composure unwavering. "I respectfully request a brief recess to speak with my client." Judge Parker studied them both, her expression giving nothing away. "This court will recess for 15 minutes, she declared, rising and stepping briskly into her chambers. Elias leaned towards the stranger beside him, his voice a low murmur. "I don't have the money for this." Ross smiled softly. "You won't need it. My firm, Williams, Ross, and Parker, is taking this on pro bono." Elias furrowed his brow at the name. "Parker," he repeated, a flicker of recognition. "Exactly like the judge," Ross confirmed, his eyes holding a knowing glint. Inside her private chambers, Judge Olivia Parker removed her glasses, her hands trembling slightly. 20 years on the bench had instilled in her an ironclad control, but the name Elias Carter had pierced through that carefully constructed composure. "It can't be the same man," she whispered, a desperate plea against the rising tide of memory. Yet, the fragments of information, the dates, the unit, they aligned with a precision that could not be ignored. She opened a desk drawer and retrieved a worn photograph. A younger Olivia stood beaming beside her brother, Lieutenant Jack Parker, resplendent in his Marine dress uniform. His arm rested proudly across her shoulders, their faces radiant with the promise of the future. Beside the photograph lay Jack's final letter from the deployment in Iraq, its edges softened by years of quiet grief. In it, he recounted a harrowing engagement outside Fallujah. His unit had been pinned down, facing intense incoming threats. But then, a figure emerged from the chaos, Staff Sergeant Quinn, charging fearlessly into the danger, dragging a wounded Marine to safety, his actions providing cover for the others to retreat with their injured. "If not for him," Jack had written, his words etched in Olivia's heart, "none of us would have survived." 2 weeks later, the devastating news arrived: Jack had been lost due to an explosive device. Olivia vividly remembered the funeral. The solemn folding of the flag, the crushing silence of her parents' heartbreak, and the Marine who had approached them afterward. "Your son saved my life," he had said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was the one he carried." He never finished the sentence, the weight of his gratitude hung heavy in the air. His name, Mason Quinn. Over the years, Olivia had made attempts to find him, hoping to glean more details about Jack's final moments, to somehow bridge the chasm of grief. But the military records indicated he had been redeployed almost immediately after the incident. Later, she learned he had been discharged with severe PTSD and a traumatic brain injury, lost to the very system he had served so bravely. Now, 2 decades later, the man who had saved her brother sat in her courtroom, a stranger to everyone but her. A knock on the door broke her reverie. Alexander Ross entered, his face etched with concern. "Olivia, what is this?" he asked, his voice a familiar comfort. As her late husband's former law partner and a lifelong friend of the family. He was one of the few who dared to call her by her first name within the professional confines of her chambers. "It's him, Alex," she replied, her voice barely a whisper, gesturing towards the faded photograph. "The Marine who saved Jack, the one who carried him out of that ambush." Understanding dawned in Ross's eyes. "The homeless veteran in your courtroom?" He paused, his voice dropping with a newfound gravity. "That's Elias Carter, the same man you've been trying to find for years." Olivia nodded slowly, the pieces of the puzzle finally locking into place. "His service record confirms it. Fallujah. 2004, same unit as Jack. He was awarded the Silver Star for the exact engagement Jack described in his letters." A chilling realization washed over her. "Does he know who you are?" "I doubt it," Ross replied. "You married Thomas after law school. Took his last name. Carter wouldn't recognize you now. It's been 20 years." Olivia took a shaky breath, trying to regain her composure. How does a hero like that end up like this, Alex? How does someone who once saved lives wind up alone on trial just for trying to stay warm? Ross shook his head, a deep sadness in his eyes. In the short time we spoke, I got the sense he's endured more than most. Severe PTSD after his last deployment. His wife left while he was overseas. His benefits got caught in bureaucratic red tape. He did construction work for years until his injuries made it impossible. After that, job loss, eviction, and eventually the streets. Olivia closed her eyes, Jack's voice echoing in her memory. Carter was the best of us. The kind of Marine who'd risk everything for his brothers. If I turn out half as good, I'll consider myself lucky. Ross spoke gently now. You could recuse yourself. No one would question it. No, she said firmly, her resolve hardening. I'm not letting this man disappear again. You know there are ethical risks. I do, she acknowledged, straightening her shoulders. But there are ethical obligations, too, especially to those who gave everything for this country. When Judge Parker returned to the courtroom, her posture was impeccable, her voice steady, her face a carefully constructed mask of judicial neutrality. Yet, those who knew her well might have detected the subtle tremor in her hands as she adjusted her papers. Mr. Ross, she began formally, has your client made a decision? Ross rose smoothly. Yes, Your Honor. We're asking for dismissal of all charges. Mr. Carter wasn't trespassing, he was trying to survive a dangerous freeze, and we can demonstrate that restaurant employees gave him implied permission to be on the premises. The prosecutor opened his mouth to object, but Judge Parker held up a hand, silencing him. I have questions for the defendant. She stated, her focus turning directly to Elias. Mr. Carter, your military file lists Fallujah, 2004. Is that correct? Elias straightened, decades of ingrained military discipline resurfacing. Yes, ma'am. 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. And on April 17, she continued, her voice clear and precise, were you part of an OP near the western edge of the city? Confusion flickered across Elias's lined face. Yes, ma'am. We were escorting a supply convoy when we got ambushed. During the intense conflict, Judge Parker asked, did you rescue Lieutenant Jack Parker while under enemy attack? Silence filled the courtroom. Elias, recalling the past, softly said, yes, he was hit trying to help another. He continued, I got him to safety, but he urged me to help others. From the gallery, a man confirmed, Carter saved 6 of us that day. A murmur went through the room. The judge called for order and announced a recess, her gaze meeting Elias's with a significant promise of more to discuss. The older Marine added, Carter faced heavy threats to save the lieutenant. Despite the prosecutor's objection, the judge affirmed its relevance. Inside her chambers, the carefully constructed dam of Judge Parker's composure finally broke. She pressed shaking fingers to her lips, as if trying to contain 20 years of buried grief and gratitude. After a long, steadying breath, she picked up the phone. Colonel Matthews, it's Olivia Parker. Yes, I know it's been a long time. But I need a favor, and I need it urgently. Exactly 10 minutes later, she returned to the courtroom. She was not alone. 3 Marines followed closely behind her, a full colonel, a master sergeant, and a young corporal carrying a polished wooden case. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the stunned onlookers. At the sight of those crisp uniforms, Elias stood instinctively, his aged joints stiff, but his posture regaining a flicker of its former military bearing. Muscle memory, ingrained over years of service, momentarily overpowered the weight of his current circumstances. Judge Parker took her place on the bench, but instead of reaching for her reading glasses, she set them aside. For the first time in her distinguished judicial career, she addressed the courtroom not solely as a judge delivering a verdict, but as an individual with a deeply personal connection to the man standing before her. Before we proceed, she began, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through the lingering whispers, I must share a personal connection to this case. She looked directly at Elias, her gaze unwavering. The Lieutenant Jack Parker mentioned earlier, that was my brother. A collective gasp swept through the room. Elias's brow furrowed, a dawning recognition flickering in the depths of his eyes. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, thick enough to feel. 20 years ago, Olivia continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart, my brother wrote home about a staff sergeant who saved his life in Fallujah. He said this man ran through perilous conditions to reach him after he was gravely wounded. then selflessly cover the rest of his unit as they evacuated the injured. Her voice, though composed, held the unmistakable sheen of unshed tears. That man was Staff Sergeant Elias Carter. From the gallery, the silver-haired Marine from earlier stepped forward once more, his presence radiating conviction. "It's true," he affirmed, his voice ringing with authority. "I saw it with my own eyes." Carter took at least 2 rounds pulling that officer to safety. "He's a hero." Judge Parker gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging his words, then continued. 2 weeks later, my brother was killed in action. At his funeral, several Marines approached our family. They spoke of Jack's courage, his dedication, but also of the man who had given us 2 extra weeks with him, precious time we otherwise never would have had. Now, her gaze locked onto Elias, her voice filled with profound emotion. "After Jack's death, I tried to find you, Sergeant Carter, but the Marine Corps said you'd been redeployed. Years later, I learned you'd been discharged, but no one could tell me where you went. You simply vanished." Elias stood silent, a storm of emotions, disbelief, confusion, a flicker of long-suppressed pride, washing across his weathered face. "I never stopped searching," she confessed, her voice softening. "And now, whether by fate, by divine intervention, or simply by the strange and often inexplicable workings of the universe, you walk into my courtroom," she gestured towards the distinguished colonel standing beside her. "This is Colonel James Matthews," she announced. "He commanded my brother's unit. He has something to share." Colonel Matthews stepped forward, his bearing impeccable. "Staff Sergeant Carter," he began, his voice carrying the weight of authority and respect. "The Marine Corps has been trying to locate you for quite some time. Your personnel file was one of thousands meticulously reviewed under the Veterans Reconsideration Initiative." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "New intelligence regarding your deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan warranted a comprehensive update to both your commendations and your benefits." The young corporal beside him carefully opened the polished wooden case he held. Inside, nestled on a bed of deep blue velvet, lay a gleaming medal. "By order of the Secretary of the Navy," Colonel Matthews announced, his voice resonating through the hushed courtroom, "in recognition of extraordinary bravery on April 17, 2004, the Navy Cross is hereby awarded to Staff Sergeant Elias J. Carter, United States Marine Corps." A collective gasp echoed across the room. The Navy Cross, the second highest honor awarded for valor, surpassed only by the Medal of Honor. "Until recently," Colonel Matthews continued, "portions of your mission were classified. But your actions that day, Sergeant Carter, didn't just save Lieutenant Parker and 5 other Marines. They directly disrupted a complex enemy ambush that could have wiped out the entire supply convoy. Your Silver Star has been formally upgraded." Elias's jaw clenched, his composure, so carefully maintained for so long, finally beginning to crack. For the first time, he murmured, his voice thick with disbelief, "There must be some mistake. I didn't do anything special. Just did my job." "No mistake, Sergeant," the colonel replied, his voice firm and resolute. "And this is long overdue." From the gallery, a voice rang out with crisp military authority, "Attention on deck." The silver-haired Marine snapped to full attention, and one by one, others in the courtroom followed suit, veterans, former officers, even civilians who understood the profound weight of sacrifice. Soon, the entire room was on its feet, a silent tribute to the quiet hero standing before them. Even the young prosecutor, caught between legal decorum and an undeniable surge of human decency, stood respectfully. Judge Parker, no longer able to fully contain the emotions welling within her, gently wiped at her tears. Her voice shook slightly as she spoke. "In light of these extraordinary developments, all charges against Staff Sergeant Elias Carter are hereby dismissed. Permanently." She brought down the gavel with a resounding thud, the sound echoing the finality of her decision. "This courtroom is adjourned." As the courtroom began to settle, the Master Sergeant approached Elias, holding a tablet in his hands. "Sir," he said respectfully, "we've been trying to locate you to correct your VA records. Your disability rating has now been reassessed, 100% service-connected, retroactive to your original discharge date." Elias blinked, a look of stunned disbelief on his face. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means you're entitled to full back pay, sir," the Master Sergeant explained, his voice gentle. "Complete medical coverage, housing assistance, educational benefits, anything you need going forward." Alexander Ross stepped forward, his expression determined. Our firm will ensure every single piece of that is processed swiftly and efficiently. No more delays, no more bureaucratic stonewalling. From the back of the courtroom, Jimmy, the kind-hearted cook who had left sandwiches for Elias behind the cafe, stepped forward, his eyes brimming with emotion. My dad used to tell me. Jimmy began, his voice thick with unshed tears. There was a Marine who saved his whole platoon in Desert Storm. He said, if you ever meet a man named Elias Carter, you owe him everything. Jimmy reached out a hand, tears finally slipping free. I never knew that man was you. Not until today, the young prosecutor, visibly moved by the unfolding events, approached Elias slowly. Sir, he stammered, his voice filled with remorse, I had no idea. Please accept my sincerest apology for how this case was handled. Elias stood amidst the rising room, his posture slowly regaining its quiet power, as though decades of unspoken honor were finally being acknowledged, lifting a tremendous weight from his weary shoulders, one breath at a time. Judge Parker stepped down from the bench. The formal distance, the judicial barrier, had dissolved. She stopped directly in front of Elias, her voice steady but filled with profound meaning. My brother once told us what you said to him that day, she began softly, her eyes meeting his. No Marine gets left behind. Not while I'm still breathing. Today, Sergeant Carter, she concluded, her voice thick with emotion, we finally keep that promise to you. 2 weeks later. Elias Carter stood before a simple mirror in a quiet apartment, still adjusting to a life that felt surreal. It was part of a housing program specifically designed for veterans like him, a sanctuary of peace and stability he had long forgotten. The walls were bare, save for one carefully placed frame displaying his newly awarded Navy Cross, flanked by his long-lost Purple Hearts and service medals, recovered from a forgotten storage locker by Alexander Ross. A gentle knock pulled him from his reflection. He opened the door to find Olivia Parker standing there, no longer in her judicial robes, but simply as herself, holding a small, worn box. May I come in, Sergeant Carter, she asked. A soft smile gracing her lips. Just Elias is fine, he replied with a humble smile, a genuine warmth returning to his eyes. Then it's just Olivia, she responded, stepping inside the modest living room. They sat across from each other, the quiet of their shared past hanging in the air. I brought something, Olivia said, carefully opening the box. Inside lay a bundle of worn letters, tied with a faded ribbon. They're from Jack. He wrote us weekly while he was deployed. She handed one to Elias. This one mentions you. It's dated the day after you saved him. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the fragile paper. Jack's handwriting, clear and sharp, just as he remembered. Mom, Dad, Elias read aloud, his voice thick with emotion. Don't worry about the news. I'm safe. Thanks to one of our NCOs. Staff Sergeant Carter did something yesterday I still can't quite believe. When our unit was ambushed. He moved through perilous conditions like it didn't exist. He refused to leave me, even when I ordered him to, said no Marine gets left behind. Not on his watch. Elias's voice cracked, the weight of those long-ago words hitting him anew. He mentioned you often, Olivia added quietly, her eyes filled with a gentle sadness. Said you were the Marine he looked up to. He was a good officer, Elias murmured softly. Still young, but he cared about his people. That's rare. Olivia looked around the simple apartment, a place born from loss and a desire for change. After Jack died, I went to law school, she shared. This Veterans Court program, the housing initiative, it all started because of the things he wrote. About how the system so often forgets its own. Elias shifted uncomfortably. I'm not a hero, he insisted, his voice low. I just did what needed to be done. That's exactly what heroes always say, Olivia replied with a quiet, knowing smile. She hesitated for a moment, then added, there's one more thing you should know. The day Jack died, he was leading a mission to track down insurgents targeting civilians. He volunteered for it. His final letter said he wanted to live up to the example you set. That sentence struck Elias with a force greater than any battlefield wound. For 20 long years, he had carried the silent burden of doubt, wondering if his act of saving Jack had been a cruel twist of fate, merely delaying the inevitable. Perhaps even making things worse. He didn't die because of you, Elias, Olivia said gently, reading the unspoken turmoil in his eyes. He lived the way he did because of you. They sat in comfortable silence, Two lives inextricably woven together by service, sacrifice, and a shared sorrow that now held the fragile bud of healing. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and steady, blanketing the city in a quiet, pristine white. Finally, Elias spoke, his voice barely audible. For years, sleeping on sidewalks, I kept thinking no one remembered. Like none of it mattered anymore. Olivia nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. But it did, Elias, she affirmed softly. To Jack, to every Marine you saved that day. And to me. As she stood to leave, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the profound connection they now shared. Jack used to say the true measure of a Marine isn't what he does in front of a crowd, she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. It's what he does when no one's watching. You lived that, Elias. Even when the world forgot, you carried yourself with a quiet dignity. Elias stood a little taller than he had in years, a quiet strength radiating from within. Someone remembered my name, he said softly, a profound sense of peace washing over him. After all this time, someone remembered. In that single, quiet moment, something long broken within him began to mend. Not just in Elias Carter, but perhaps in every soul forgotten by the very system they had served with honor and sacrifice. Elias Carter's story reveals enduring honor and the power of unseen bravery. Let's remember and honor all who serve, recognizing their sacrifices and quiet strength. Every life matters, every sacrifice deserves acknowledgement. Witness the power of human connection in bringing justice and healing. Share this story to honor our heroes. Thank you for watching.